Have you ever found yourself in a conversation where, despite expressing everything you needed to, you walked away feeling defeated? Have you ever experienced that tightness in your throat, as if each word spoken had distanced you further from your inner strength? Perhaps you're surrounded by individuals who speak loudly, interrupt constantly, ridicule others, and control environments with arrogance masquerading as confidence. And maybe, deep within, you believed that remaining quiet was a sign of weakness, that not standing up for yourself meant surrendering, that not responding meant losing. But what if I revealed to you that all of this is an illusion? That genuine power has never resided in words, but in their absence. Nietzsche, one of history's most misunderstood philosophers, perceived something that few possess the courage to acknowledge. Those who speak excessively reveal too much. Those who need to persuade are already disadvantaged. Society teaches us that we must fight, explain ourselves, defend our perspectives, as if every discussion were a battle for truth. But nature suggests something different, a more subtle, more lethal, and infinitely more intelligent approach. He believed that silence is not merely an absence of sound, but an overwhelming presence. Silence unsettles, it destabilizes, it compels others to confront themselves. This content is for you who constantly feel ignored, overshadowed, invalidated. For you who leave conversations feeling that no one truly heard what you intended to communicate. For you who are exhausted from being the easy target, the agreeable one, the one who attempts to maintain peace while others exploit your tranquility. Perhaps you have confused your silence with submission, but today I will demonstrate that silence can be your most powerful weapon, and that true victory doesn't come from winning an argument, but from never needing to enter one. If this resonates with you, please subscribe to Beyond the Mind and help us grow this community of deeper thinkers. Prepare to see silence in a new light, not as an absence of response, but as the definitive response. Let's explore Nietzsche's concepts and discover how to master any situation without uttering a single word. Why do we feel such a compulsion to respond, to rebut, to correct, to prove our righteousness? Because fundamentally, we've been conditioned to believe that truth must be defended at all costs. That if we remain silent, we're allowing others to triumph. But Nietzsche saw this as a symptom of our deepest vulnerability, the fear of appearing weak. Behind this fear lies the ego, a fragile ego that cannot tolerate being questioned, that confuses disagreement with attack, and that transforms any conversation into a battlefield. Nietzsche declared that most people don't seek truth when they argue. They seek power. They seek to reaffirm their beliefs, not because they're solid, but because if they're shaken, everything crumbles. Argumentation, in this sense, isn't a tool of wisdom. It's defensive armor, a desperate cry from the ego to maintain control of the narrative. What does this mean? That when you feel compelled to justify yourself, to prove your point, you've already entered their game and lost. Because the simple need to justify your position demonstrates that you're still trapped in the desire to be accepted, validated, understood. Nietzsche called this the herd morality, the behavior of those who live under others' expectations, who want to be seen as good, correct, just. But this quest for approval is exactly what keeps you weak. True strength, Nietzsche said, lies not in convincing others, but in not needing to do so. It's in holding your vision even in the face of laughter, criticism, rejection. It's in being misunderstood and remaining unshaken. What he proposes is a type of power that isn't measured in verbal victories, but in internal mastery. A power that comes from the ability to remain calm while everyone around you loses control. A power that grows when you stop reacting. If you truly want to win, you need to understand this. The game of discussion is theater, and the first to stand up to perform has already lost. Nietzsche knew that the reactive mind is a subjugated mind. The observing mind, that's the dangerous one, because it's above the need to prove anything. But then, if we shouldn't react, how can we exert power over others? If words betray us, how do we make others feel our strength without saying a single phrase? Nietzsche had an answer for that, and it lies in the ideal of the Übermensch, the being who transcends the limitations of common morality and dominates the world through absolute self-control. In the next part, we'll explore this figure and understand how it embodies the strategic use of silence as a weapon of dominance. Are you ready for this level? Because from here on out, silence begins to speak. Nietzsche didn't write for the weak. He wrote for the few who have the courage to look within, confront their own misery, and transform it into strength. For him, the common human lives trapped by conventions, moralism, and the need for others' applause. But there exists another type of being, rare, dangerous, free. The Übermensch doesn't live by reacting to the world. He shapes the world in his own image. And the most impressive part? He often does this in complete silence. The Übermensch doesn't need to win debates. He doesn't engage in cheap emotional games. He observes, he understands, he carefully chooses when to speak, and more importantly, when to remain silent. Because he has understood something that others ignore. Silence is a form of language, a language that doesn't try to convince, it imposes presence. The silence of the Übermensch isn't empty. It's a threat, it's authority, it's the sound of self-mastery. While others shout, he commands respect with his gaze. While others explain, he observes and reveals others' weaknesses merely with his calm. His silence is a wall. Those on the other side despair trying to guess what lies behind it. And in that despair, they make mistakes. They reveal too much. They lose their balance. This silence isn't passivity. It's absolute control of one's own energy. It's strategic economy. The Übermensch knows that every spoken word is a revealed move. Every emotional reaction is an exposure of a weak point. That's why he remains quiet, not because he has nothing to say, but because he doesn't need to say anything. He has transcended the need to prove something to someone. His presence already speaks for him, and more than that, it disturbs, because his silence forces others to look within, to deal with their own noise. In a society of noise, those who master silence are kings. Nietzsche saw the Übermensch as one who creates his own values, his own rules, his own morality. He doesn't depend on anyone's validation, and that's why he's feared, because nothing destabilizes more than an individual who cannot be manipulated by guilt, fear, or the need for acceptance. His silence is the shield against all these mechanisms, and when he speaks, it's because his words will topple an empire. But this raises an essential question. What makes silence so unsettling for others? Why do so many people feel threatened when someone simply chooses not to react? What happens within the human mind when the expected confrontation is replaced by an overwhelming absence? The answer lies in psychology, and that's exactly what we'll explore in the next part. Because to understand the power of silence, we first need to understand the chaos it generates in the minds of others. And believe me, it's much deeper than it seems. Silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's a mirror. and what it reflects for many is unbearable. When you choose not to react, you're not just silencing yourself. You're forcing the other person to hear their own voice, to confront their own arguments without the comfort of external resistance. And that destabilizes, because most people don't speak to express themselves. They speak to protect themselves, to convince themselves, to hide the emptiness that exists between what they say and who they are. And then, when you remain silent, their disguise falls away. Social psychology has already shown that in confrontational situations, silence is perceived as judgment. It doesn't matter if you're just listening. The speaker begins to feel exposed, insecure. Why? Because without your response, without your reaction, they lose control of the narrative. The human brain goes into a state of alert. The amygdala, the region of fear and anxiety, activates. The other person starts to project their own fears onto you. Is he judging me? Did he notice my insecurity? Does he know I'm bluffing? And in this psychological battlefield, silence acts like an invisible blade. It cuts where no one sees, but everyone feels. Nietzsche sensed this long before modern psychology confirmed it. For him, the average person lives as a slave to their reactions. They act on impulse, react out of vanity, speak out of fear of being forgotten. The superior spirit, the one who masters themselves, remains silent because they know that every word given is a piece handed to the enemy. Every emotional reaction is an involuntary scream that reveals where to attack. Moreover, silence has a devastating effect on manipulators. People who thrive on the emotional control of others depend on their reactions to stay in the game. When you don't react, you break the cycle and the manipulator panics. They need your response to validate their own position. Without it, they lose themselves. They reveal themselves. They show the weakness they've tried so hard to hide. But there's something even deeper. Silence also triggers unresolved pains. It activates traumas of rejection, abandonment, humiliation. Because suddenly the other person realizes they're not at the center, that their words aren't enough, that their presence doesn't make an impact. And this is intolerable for the narcissistic ego. That's why when you remain silent, you're not just defending yourself. You're attacking where it hurts the most, at the center of the illusion. This is why silence requires strength. It's uncomfortable not just for others, but for you as well, because it goes against everything that's been taught, against the impulse to react, to justify oneself, to explain oneself. But it's precisely for this reason that it's powerful, because it demands mastery, and mastery is true power. Now that you understand how silence operates in the mind of the other, how it activates insecurities, breaks down defenses, and unmasks postures, it's time to go further, to stop being just an observer and become someone who uses this strength intentionally, strategically. In the next part, you'll discover exactly how to transform silence into a conscious weapon, how to win any argument without saying a single word. And when you learn to do this, no one will be able to control you anymore. The time has come to stop merely understanding the power of silence and start using it, because knowledge without practice is just dead theory. From now on, you'll learn to transform your silence into a precision weapon, no longer as a defensive shield, but as a sharp blade ready to cut through others' masks at the exact moment they least expect it. And the first step is simple yet brutal. Be silent when your will screams for a response. This requires strength, because everything in you will want to react, will want to justify itself, will want to prove that it's right. But that desire is poison. Every time you give into it, you reveal that you're still under the control of others, that you still care about what they think, that you're still playing their game. True silence is born only when you kill that need, when you understand that you owe nothing to anyone, that the truth doesn't need to be spoken to exist. The second weapon of silence is observation. While others talk, get lost in explanations, and try to fill the void with words, you listen. But you don't listen as someone waiting for their turn to speak. You listen like a hunter listens to the footsteps of prey in the forest. You perceive the fears hidden between the lines, the subtle contradictions, the insecurities disguised as arrogance. And you store all of this, because when you speak, if you speak, it will be surgical. It will be with the precision of someone who masters the emotional territory of the other. The third weapon, time. Learn to let silence last. The pause is an element of tension, and tension is power. While the other person speaks, waiting for your reaction, and it doesn't come, they experience an internal collapse. The discomfort grows. Their mind begins to fill the void with assumptions, fears, paranoia. A simple look from you, accompanied by silence, can have more impact than 10 well-formulated sentences. The fourth weapon, unpredictability. When you master silence, you become unpredictable, and the unpredictable is always feared because people don't know what to expect from you. And when they don't know what to expect, they lose the advantage. They become cautious. They start measuring every word. You invert the logic of interaction. From reactive, you become the gravitational center of the conversation. At this point, silence isn't absence. It's pure dominance. But be careful. Don't confuse silence with passivity. Nietzsche was never an advocate of weakness. The silence we're talking about here is active, tense, charged with intention. You're not withholding. You're preparing, choosing, positioning yourself with a kind of strength that doesn't need to be displayed to be felt. And when the right moment comes, the moment when silence has already said everything it needed to, you can speak. A single sentence, a precise comment, something that ends the discussion, not because it was louder, but because it was truer, deeper, more undeniable. But this brings us to an even more delicate issue, because up to this point, we've talked about how to use silence to win. But there are moments when the game isn't just about winning. It's about emotionally surviving. There are situations where people aren't just debating with you. They're using you, manipulating you, draining you, and you, without realizing it, are giving away your power every day. You're being dominated without a single word needing to be spoken. And that's where the darkest point of this journey comes in. When silence is no longer strategy, but a silent scream from someone who has lost control of their own life. In the next part, we'll expose this truth, show how you may be being used and not even realize it. Because while you think you're avoiding conflicts, someone may be building an empire on your silence. And Nietzsche already knew that. Is there anything more perverse than being silenced? It's being conditioned to think that silence is your only option, that swallowing your anger, conceding in discussions, avoiding conflict at all costs is synonymous with maturity, that remaining silent is a sign of balance. But what if I told you that this could be a trap? That many times this type of silence isn't wisdom, it's disguised submission. Nietzsche saw this with brutal clarity. What you call peace is often just your domesticated surrender. Have you noticed how some people take advantage of your calmness, your ability to listen, to overlook, to avoid confrontation? They push their ideas, impose their wills, occupy spaces that were yours, and you let them. You convince yourself that it's not worth fighting, that it's better to maintain harmony, that it's not that big of a deal. But the truth is, you're paying a very high price for this false peace. And the worst part? You're being used by those who understand that you will never react. Nietzsche spoke of the morality of slaves, that value system constructed by the weak to survive in a world dominated by the strong. It's the morality of resignation, of guilt, of being nice, an invisible code that teaches you to nullify yourself, to diminish yourself, to conform and still feel virtuous for it. But Nietzsche didn't write for those who resign themselves. He wrote for those who dare to break these chains, for those who realize they're being used and decide to stop participating in their own submission. When you accept this type of silence, the one that swallows you from within, you're surrendering your power without realizing it. You're being shaped by the expectations of others. You're no longer yourself. You're what others need you to be. And this is the opposite of what Nietzsche called the will to power. Because the true will to power isn't to shout, isn't to dominate others. It's to dominate oneself. It's to regain control of your own narrative. It's to be silent not because you're afraid, but because you owe nothing to anyone. This silence of submission needs to die, and in its place, the silence of presence must be born. The one that doesn't bend, that doesn't humiliate, that doesn't apologize for existing. The one that stands up amidst chaos and without saying a word, changes the course of the situation. This is the silence that Nietzsche would respect, the silence of the individual who has become the master of themselves. But how to reach this level? How to move from being manipulated to being the master of your own presence? How to kill the herd morality within you and be reborn as someone who imposes authority even when silent? The answer lies in the most powerful figure of Nietzsche's philosophy, the Übermensch. We've already talked about him. Now it's time to understand how to become one. In the next and final chapter, you'll discover what it takes to embody this new type of human being. Because the world doesn't need more talkers. It needs those who master silence and reign with it. We've reached the final point. And now I need you to understand one thing with all the clarity possible. Silence isn't absence, isn't emptiness, isn't a space between sentences. True silence is pure presence. It's mastery. It's the sign that you're no longer reacting to the world. You're shaping it with your mere existence. Nietzsche never wrote for those who are content to survive. He wrote for those who want to transcend, for those who are willing to tear off the masks that society imposed, even if it hurts. The silence of the Übermensch isn't the silence of the oppressed, nor of the coward. It's the silence of the warrior who has already won even before the battle begins. It's the stillness of one who no longer needs to prove anything to anyone because he knows who he is, and more importantly, he knows what he deserves. Now look at your life. How many times have you remained silent out of fear, out of guilt, out of not wanting to disturb? How many times have you let others decide for you, speak for you, trample over your truth? Enough. Nietzsche would say that living this way is an offense to existence itself, that accepting this kind of silence is betraying yourself. From today on, your silence needs to change its tone. It needs to stop being an escape and become an invisible shout of authority, a boundary, an affirmation of who you are, even if no one understands. Because who you are doesn't need to be understood. It needs to be lived. And that requires courage. Do you have that courage? If this content has transformed your perspective on silence and power, please hit that like button and subscribe to Beyond the Mind. We're building a community of individuals who refuse to accept mediocrity and choose to master themselves instead. Then comment below, "I choose the silence that commands respect," not just so I know you made it this far, but so you can publicly affirm this choice, this commitment to yourself. Because words have power, even when they speak about silence. And don't stop here. The next video is essential. It will expand what you learned here and take your mind even further. Watch it not for me, but because you deserve to go beyond. And remember, the weak shout, the strong remain silent. The wise choose when.